the first principle of the Kabbalion, the Hermetic principle. All is mind, the universe is mental. And this understanding of how inextricable the understanding of the universe is with the understanding of our mind.
Well, when we were out in the Amazon, what we were seeking was to try to prove all of that. We were trying to actually find ways to prove whether any of the mythological context had enough power to do something about what seemed like an earth that had gone in a desperate direction, and how you would try to create a force strong enough to be able to kind of course correct along that way. And what we ended up figuring out was that it wasn't about a movement outward. It was about going so inward that from the inside, you end up being able to find infinity. So it wasn't try to find infinity out there. It was go so inside you that you could find the infinity that was in your matter. And it would make us question over and over again, how much of us was really the matter versus how much was the matter just an anchor for the rest of us? And then we had to go explore what was that rest of us. And that's a wild course as well, through delusion and justification and desire, and trying to figure out how all of that kind of plays itself out along the way. But really we found that you find the infinity from within. Then you start to explore beyond, and it's like piercing the veil of physicality of the matter beyond us. I mean, when we're fixated on ourselves and we're looking out at this incredible view, the earth looks huge. But if you get really far away from Earth, like just the rings of Saturn, Earth looks smaller than a pea. It looks like smaller than a drop of water. From galaxies further away from that, you can't even see it. It's almost nothing, And so I think when we go deep inside ourselves, that's where we actually find out how big we can really be, and how much more of us is beyond the mind, which is really like an encapsulation and a codification, like you mentioned, of that totality of that energy. But you move beyond those codes as well, and you move into sort of universal sets of codes, interdimensional sets of codes. You move beyond the mythology, you move beyond the entities and beyond the beings that hold together our story. All of a sudden, space, time, relativity, scale, they all disappear.
Yeah.
The purity of consciousness is still there. You're still alive. You still know it, but you have no determined space time. There is no Newtonian physics. Newton's long gone. He's just an ancestor at that point. The science that people are doing now is trying to prove the things that you're tapping into and actually using to have that experience.
Yeah.
And then in that space, you do realize that there is a field. It's not just you and emptiness. It's not just you. In fact, there's no way to tell where the beginning of that field is and where you are within it. You are of the field, and it is seamless.
Yeah.
I think it's all intellectual at that point.
Yeah.
And what are we talking about when we talk about the field? We're talking about space-time, what people call space-time. We're talking about the universe. And then you have to ask, well, where did the universe come from? At the level of field, it doesn't have an origin. It doesn't come from anywhere. And it's creating where itself. So it kind of inside out all of the ways that we feel cut off and separated from it. If we haven't had those experiences, we have to ask ourselves why. What has kept us from having those experiences? Why are we returning to the plants that taught us the origins of culture from over 50,000 to 100,000 years ago?
Yeah.
Why do we actually have to go back into the plants to be able to regain that understanding of connection? And I think it ultimately comes down to linguistics and the ways that language has codified, or our use of language has codified the mind. So we have now this idea of separation interwoven into absolutely everything.
Right. I mean,
and that's part of control.
Language is just chopping things into little pieces all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And making little boxes around everything. Even when I say boxes, it's making a box.
Totally.
Like you can't escape it. We can't have a podcast without a million little sashimis we're making of reality.
Absolutely.
All the time.
It's the tool we have right now, but we do have tools at our disposal that go beyond that. That's the beautiful thing. There's a number of different tools we have. Meditation. But then when you get into the sacred plants, what's so amazing about them is how fast it can be. It's the accelerant. And it's not that it's a race to enlightenment, but because, on the integration side, it can take years to ultimately deal with certain experiences that we have inside ceremony. But it's an accelerant to being able to have the experience so that these concepts that we're using and the sashimi are actually palpable. It's something that we can relate to in a complete
we can enjoy
way.
the sashimi.
Why not?
Really actually, it's almost like what I find is the farther I go out, the more I enjoy being in.
It's a gift.
That's the real gift of it. I was in a Temescal ceremony it's like a womb space, but it's a very uncomfortable womb space. And you start to feel like you're in a prison. And this clear vision came through. And then I had this connection of, oh, this is either a prison. I'm stuck here in this 220 degrees sweating and I can't leave. And then all of a sudden this prison was just this infinite playground where visions started to come and where my heart could actually sing a prayer that was true in a voice that was true.
Oh, beautiful.
And it was a gift. And so it's just this turning of a story, you know, was really all it took to kind of pierce what was.
In that experience, where was it that the mind shifted?
It shifted so I think the mind is only able to operate through story. And so in the reality where I can't go, I can't escape, it's dark, I'm uncomfortable, I'm confined, and you start focusing your attention on that, then it was a prison. And then the story shifted, is like, oh, here I am in the womb again. And here I am with the Divine Mother. And just once I felt connected, that story just evaporated. And it was still hot. Didn't change it. It was still hot, you know, but the whole story changed and then everything changed.
When you were in the visions themselves, did you experience heat at that time?
It was just the substrate of the heaven that I was in.
Yeah.
And in that substrate, there's just this kind of radical acceptance for what it was. So all of the ways that heat is its own little piece of sashimi was fucking changed. So I wouldn't have called it that. Actually, it would be a lie, because what I would have called heat a minute before was not the same thing that I would have called it then.
Yeah. No, I asked that because there's this moment where the brain's running on the language that it uses during the day.
Yeah.
And it's hot and it's tight and it's a prison and it's confined. And then there's a moment where the brain does something different. It's a shift in consciousness. No one really understands what is the trigger, catalyst, when, why for each person, but it's a commonality amongst pretty much everybody who's had these experiences that the shift takes place. And when it does, the context that was there before changes.
Mm-hmm.
So all the things that were causing the problems before are not the same anymore.
Yeah.
And it's different every time. But that's why I ask about the visions themselves. Because when I've been in those situations, when the visions really kick on, everything that was the context that was creating the difficulty before the visions always vanishes. Yeah. Whether it's an ayahuasca, it could be nausea. It could be that feeling like your just whole body's at rapid boil and you just can't breathe enough, or you realize you're hyperventilating, you know, or it's in a sweat where it's just like you say, just way too hot, you know?
Yeah.
Like just so hot. I've been in those before where you're just thinking like, God, is there a way out? You know?
Yeah, of course. I actually don't think it's a good sweat unless there's at least some point
some thought in your
where
mind.
you're like, I don't know.
Dang, there's no exit.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in the sweat and they put me on the opposite side of the door so I could see the door, but the rocks were between me and the door. There was no way I was going over the rocks.
Yeah.
It just seemed so far away.
Yeah.
You know, until it got hot enough and then that trigger happened and then all the visions started and then it wasn't hot. But I remember in one of those visions these buffalo robes were put over me and I was like, you cannot put buffalo robes over me in the visions. It's already too hot. You can't add robes, right? Like that was going to be too much. But then ultimately it was okay in the nature of that itself. That was happening last week in the ayahuasca ceremonies where we were going really big, but we weren't going into chaos. We were going into this unbelievably stable space by going inward. It was very meditative. It seemed very Buddhic at first. Mm-hmm. But then as the visions turned on, it was like the body became an anchor, something that was stable. And then the visions could just grow and grow and grow and grow beyond that. And the vision could become omnidirectional. But in that sort of period of time when that expansion was taking place, the body struggled. Like everybody in the sessions agreed afterwards. They were like, oh, there was a lot of nausea, or there was just that, you know, it wasn't physical heat, but that kind of internal heat, you know, and that pressure that was going on. But then ultimately, once the visions fully turned on, then again, all of that was transcended.